Listeners, welcome to Tales of Abundance. Let's go back to Stanford University in 1972. A researcher sits a 4-year-old down at a table and places a marshmallow in front of him and says, you can eat it now, or if you wait until I come back, you can have a second marshmallow. You get two. So what happened? About 30% of the kids ate the marshmallow right away. About a third of them waited the full 15 minutes and got two marshmallows. Why does any of this matter? Well, Stanford followed these kids for years and years and years, and they found that the kids who waited tended to have better outcomes. In particular, they had higher SAT scores on average. They rated more socially competent by their own parents, and they had a lower BMI 30 years later. Okay, so pretty good study. Followed them for 30 years. And this is a story, I think a lot of us have heard this before, right? And the message is obviously delayed gratification predicts success, and you will be rewarded for long-time preferences, right? Well, then several years later, researchers did a different study. Same marshmallow, but they had two separate groups this time, and they created different trust in the experimenter. So before each experience, they ran the same test where they did things and it was reliable and the researcher did what they wanted. And in the other group, the researcher did something that wasn't reliable and they found out they couldn't trust them and trust the rules of the game. Basically, it was promised better art supplies and some other stuff. But anyway, when they took the marshmallow test again, the reliable group, the people that had evidence that the researcher was good to their word, they waited an average of 12 minutes. So with evidence that they could trust the rules of the game, most of them made it to 15 minutes. The unreliable group on average just lasted 3 minutes. Okay. And why are we talking about this? Recently, Kevin O'Leary from Shark Tank, he made a statement, I think it was on one of the news channels, about, kind of the typical boomer sentiment. These kids, if they weren't doing $28 lunches and they saved that in an ETF, they would have money for a new house. And this has there's a lot of people pissed. Like young people are mad and they're up in arms. And, I came across this by an article by John Carter. Listeners will put it in the show notes, but, talking about this marshmallow test and what if you can't trust the researchers. And what we want to do today, we don't want to get too down in the dumps. We want to make this Tales of Abundance, certainly. But we want to acknowledge that it is tough today, but we want to walk away with solutions. And what can people do, whether they're young or old? What can they do in a 2026 economy? So, gentlemen, what is your initial take on this? What do you, we're all of us, we're either, we got one boomer and two Gen X here. So, what's kind of the first thing that jumps out, Anthony, John, to you guys?
Yeah, look, my sons both have had conversations with me about this recently. My daughter with some regularity as well, and part of it I think is my doing. Like I didn't eat out often at all growing up, and we eat out pretty regularly right now. And so I've set an expectation about consumption and spending that I am starting to get really honest with my kids about right now about what life was like in my 20s and 30s and what life is like later on and what choices I made and then I was raised as a product of the save a huge amount of your income and kind of, buy a boomer, my mom. But then I read a book called Die with Zero that had me rethink that a little bit. And so I think that, I think that the world is changing. It's moving faster. I think we have to be more nuanced in our education of our children. But here's the real thing out of everything we've just talked about in the last few minutes, we need to be careful about who we let give us the rules of the game. If we let people that are marketing what they want us to buy, and we think those are the rules of the game, then we're not really looking at perhaps all of the rules or the real rules of the game in their completeness. We're letting somebody else drive the outcome. And I think that's a big problem. I think that we control our thoughts and our actions. And when people understand what they can control, what they can't control, even inside of a broken system, there's so much hope to be found because we understand what we can do about the things that we can control. And so we'll talk about that more today, I'm sure.
Super Boomer, what's your first take?
I have a fair amount of sympathy for the generation. I understand where they're coming from, frankly, because I lived it. and so did my father, and so did his father. Life is freaking hard, and it has always been hard. But it's probably harder now than ever for a couple of reasons. Juxtapose the 60s and 70s, 80s, even the early 90s. We didn't really know what the hell was going on around us. You know, yeah, there were millionaires and there was, rich guys living on the hill and big boats and stuff like that, but we didn't really know what was happening. This generation for the last 20 years, every 10 seconds, they're getting hit with some sort of media or some stimuli that is, making them, jealous in a lot of ways of what other people have, and also pushing a narrative that, and our politicians are doing this, pushing a narrative that it's unfair. It's really unfair. And we're going to tell you it's unfair every single day. There's a saying, life isn't fair. That wasn't developed in the last 20 years. That was developed decades, years, hundreds of years ago. Everyone knows life isn't fair. Your breaks go your way, they don't go your way. So to your point, Randy, given that life is hard, has been hard, but it is very different now than it was. There were very clear opportunities and clear paths for people to choose. Now they have a myriad of selections, and there's a real despondent air about where this generation is and what they're going to do about it. And I think that's what the discussion today is about is, okay, yep, life sucks, then you die, but what are you going to do? What are you going to do about it to make the best of it? Create abundance in your own way. And that's the other thing we should talk about is abundance today isn't what abundance was necessarily in the 50s after World War II, the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. It's different, and living for today may be better and a more joyful experience than, socking away 20% of your income in a ETF, Mr. O'Leary.
I think too, for someone, kids in my family, for example, who are on the upward part of the K-shaped economy, having to then go experience the lower half of the K-shaped economy, like
John, can you explain what the K-shaped economy means? I'm not sure.
In a K-shaped economy, there's a wider separation, like on the letter K, between the haves and the have-nots. And the further out you go, the further the separation becomes between the haves and the have-nots. And the economy seems to be expanding the gap between the haves and the have-nots. And I think that's problematic. And I think that history has shown us that's problematic. And, the most, clear example of that in my in my thinking is the French Revolution, where the price of bread, went 10x and 10x again. And pretty soon the have-nots revolted and overthrew the haves. And so this oversimplification, I know historians are going to, probably be driven crazy by that. But the reality is that this K-shaped economy is, taking people like my kids who I want them to go earn a living and be productive members of society. They may be moved from the growing side of the K-shaped economy to the have-nots side in terms of what they have and don't have. And when I hold that up against people I know that are immigrants, they still see the U.S. as the place to come to start a business. They still see that as a place to come to change their stars, as it were, and to change their kind of position in the economy. And so I still think we have the greatest opportunity in this country to change someone's position. But I do think there are people coming from the haves part of the world and then launching their career into the have-not part of the world. And that's a shock that is real, maybe.
Yeah, the thing I keep hearing from these kids are how much more expensive everything is, right? And they're like, well, when Kevin O'Leary says take your $28 lunch or your $6 latte and put it into an ETF and you'll be able to buy a house, they're almost certainly going to push back. And the numbers, by the way, in 1980, the median home was 3.5 times the median income. Today, while the income has grown, it hasn't grown nearly as fast as the income or as the home price. Now, depending on the city, it's about double, right? But the other thing I think about when I was a kid, and maybe this is more a product of where I grew up, houses weren't nearly as nice as they are. Like, we didn't have stainless steel appliances and granite countertops, and it's just the materials that go into build. We still use the same crappy sheetrock and some of that stuff, but generally
And the
speaking,
size,
yeah,
the
they're
size of
bigger.
houses.
Yeah, they're bigger. I noticed that a couple of years ago, we were on a recruiting trip for Ryland. We were in New York, and I was driving and I was like, God, these houses are so small. Like and you could tell they'd been there for a long time. So yeah, they're bigger and they're a lot nicer, so I don't know. I don't know exactly how much of that is the system, right? But I think the other big thing that you hear a lot about, again, if I want to argue this side of these millennials, Gen Z, whatever. The other thing is they were promised that if you do the right things, you get good grades, you get into a good college, you get a degree, there'd be this job waiting. And then just having a kid that just graduated college, I could, and going to the graduation, a lot of these kids didn't have jobs, and talking to them and I feel for them. I'm kind of I'm with Anthony. It has always been hard. There has always been the same challenges, but it is a real thing. So now that we've done that, let's get back into, what else eh, what else can they do? What advice and what Anthony, let me go to you. Beforehand, you were talking about how it was hard when you're a kid. And
Yeah.
and none of these Zoomers want to hear, you know, the boomer complain about it, but I think it is worth them noting. Tell us some of the challenges when you were growing up.
Well, I'll give you a very specific example. I graduated college in 1978 in the heart of the Jimmy Carter presidency, where inflation was more than double digits, where interest rates were over 15% to buy a house. Credit card interest was, 29%, and there were no jobs. There literally were no jobs. My first job was going door to door for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, selling memberships to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. We'd knock on a auto body place and go next door to the gas station, and then next door to the liquor store, or whatever I could do. It couldn't. Then I graduated with honors and with a business degree, with a minor in marketing, and you couldn't get a job, so you just had to figure it out. Now, eventually, I settled into a career, and blah blah blah, and it went, but it was hard. Today, it's just as hard, if not harder, and the social pressure. I didn't have any. I wasn't worried about anybody next door. I wasn't worried about some TikToker, making it $1 million a month and as being an influencer and stuff like that. I didn't have that. So I had blinders on. These guys and gals, they don't have blinders on. They're rooted, they're being taught to be jealous, to be envious, and to want the easy road. That's what they're conditioned. And I feel for them for that. I really do. I mean, they are totally conditioned. I mean, I think we talked about this one time, that there's some percentage. The kids ask, what do they want to do after college? Some double-digit percentage. I thought it was 30%, maybe higher. Want to be influencers. That's a job to them. How insane is that?
Well, that's the who set the rules, right? That I mentioned
Yeah.
earlier. Like and the marketers, that one of the best descriptions I heard of marketing was like, everyone wants you to see their front lawn and their beautifully manicured flower bed out front, but they don't take you inside or let you see the backyard and the garage and the reality of the world. And so my hope is what we can do here on this show is like show people the inside of the house and the garage and the backyard that's messy, but still show you all the hope in that. Like that, because there really is a lot of hope if that's the thing that people choose to focus on. But we really do choose what we focus on.
I mean, to your point, Anthony, with the influencers, 10%, I just Googled this real quick while we're there, 10% of women 18 to 24 have an OnlyFans account, not as a viewer, as a supplier, right? Which is pretty scary. And I didn't look this up just now, but I have heard in the past, it's something like the top 0.1% of those make hundreds of thousands, millions a month. Most of them aren't really making that much money, but 10% of them, I don't know, that's a scary world. They should be free to do it, but I don't think that's
Yeah, they see that, and they think that's easy. We know how difficult it is to build an audience, to get people interested in us, and to stay interested in us, and to subscribe to our YouTube channel, and so on and so forth. It it takes a lot of work. We probably should have done this research, but I'd like to go get the last 5 years worth of the most popular influencers 5 years ago. Are they still influencers today? There might be a handful of them, but most of them come and go because it's instant gratification. It's funny or interesting at first, and then it's on to something else. And that's what this group has been living with since they came of age, when a phone was put in their hand, or a laptop or iPad was put in front of them. That's the life that they live. And it's, to John's point, who's setting the rules? Man, that's just scary. That's not You're not, and I'm using the word educate, but you're not educating yourself on all the real world possibilities in front of you. Doesn't mean I'm not talking about your math scores and your reading and writing capabilities. I'm talking about being educated about what the real world is, what's real and attainable, and is a one step forward. I grew up in a generation where it was always, I'm taking this one step because it's getting me towards a particular goal. These kids want to strap a Elon Musk rocket to their back, fire it up, and just get to where they're going. And the world doesn't work that way. It never has, and for very few people, it never will.
I'm not sure it even worked for Elon Musk, though. Like, I think even he had some, like, if you read the book.
I'm not talking about Elon. I'm talking about him as his rocket. Elon had a long struggle. I mean, multiple companies and multiple battles, and things went wrong, and he got fired. Elon Musk got fired. Steve Jobs got fired. I mean, just stop for a second. Think about that. Two of the most brilliant people on earth, most successful people, got fired. Did they think driving home that day, did they think life was easy?
By the way, Anthony, instead of asking Dr. John, I asked Dr. Gemini, who are the 5 biggest influencers 5 years ago, and if they're relevant today. So I did thankfully can do the research quick. 4 of the 5 I've never heard of. Okay. So I'm a little out of the loop, but Charlie D'Amelio, Khaby Lame, Mr. Beast, Addison Rae, and PewDiePie.
I knew 2 of those names, by the way.
Addison Rae I've heard of, and Mr. Beast, obviously.
So I know Mr. Beast well. He's more relevant. But by the way, still relevant, highly relevant, more relevant than ever, still relevant and evolved, and semi-relevant because they intentionally retired. And another one's pivoted. So they have actually maintained, whoever they are, other than I know Mr. Beast. But so, Anthony, you're talking about this. I think the other thing that's changed is community. And John, I know this is right in your wheelhouse, and you've talked about this, but I think community is lower now. Friendships and Republicans and Democrats and different things used to just go to church together, go to dinner, hang out at the park together, and I just think that's become, because of social media, I think all of that's, so I just think the community is a big part of why that's where people are leaning for.
Yeah, I don't think it's social media, Randy. I agree social media impacts that. I think the real problem came when we allowed media outlets to not have equal time for both sides of an issue so that people could go to an echo chamber. That, to me, was the real turning point where media became about media for the sake of the business of media versus being the fourth pillar of a community. I think we're going to look back at that historically and see that as a real mistake in what we did from a regulatory perspective. And I'm pretty libertarian in my views. Like, I'm pretty, small government hands off, but I just think that there's a few things you want to keep, pure. And that was a thing I think we really missed on. And I don't know that, I think once the genie's out of that bottle, maybe we can't put it back in, but that's been really problematic.
Question I would ask, is it that, or is it that, if we go back to when we were all kids, you didn't have any like, you grew up in an area and you had different people with different beliefs around you, and you were all kind of forced to work together, right? And that's one of the things I always loved about sports. You got in a locker room and everybody, you got a football team, you've got people of every belief, and you all just learn to work together on the field, and you put that to the side, right? But so I think it's TV, but these days nobody watches these news channels anymore, right? It's social media and it's so easy. Like if you had some weird thing that was only 1 in 1,000 people that appealed to, it was hard to find your people back then. Now it's so easy to get put into an echo chamber, right? Because you can find thousands of people that agree with you, even if it's a really fringe point, right? And it doesn't matter if it's good or bad, right or wrong. So I
Yeah, but
think we're saying
the
the same
take
thing, but
we are saying the same thing. Like taking away equal time allows for the polls to become more echoed and and more concentrated. And so, before you had people that just got more exposure to both sides of an issue. And so, and I tell people all the time, like, just because someone has an opinion doesn't mean that I need to respect the opinion. I respect opinions that are well formed, that are strongly convicted, loosely held, that are open to new ideas, and hopefully well formed means thought through on both sides of the issue.
I don't know if I'm going to agree with you guys on this. The community that we grew up in was, a physical community, right? You physically made friends at school, you physically talked to people, you got on a football team, and then you hung out at the park or the youth center or whatever the case might be, and you had that community. And then if you grew up in a small town like some of us did, you knew the politics of the town, and it was that. These guys and gals today have a virtual community, and I know this. Mm, this is a silly story, but on Saturday I golfed with a guy, and he had his two kids with him, both pretty good golfers. They were brother and sister, and they were talking to each other on their phones. They're in the same golf cart, okay? And they were texting each other and talking to each other on their phones. They didn't turn and talk to them. They were making fun of each other's golf swing and where the ball was going on their phone. So it's a reflex for this generation to use the technology to communicate and have their community. We've all heard about, the downside of some of the doxing and insulting of young women by other young women, and guys and so on and so forth. So it can also be an evil group in that community because it's so easy to insult someone electronically. If I insulted your girlfriend in 1974 at high school, that would have been a problem for me because a multiple number of people would have had an attitude about that and taken some action. There's no action being taken today, right? You can just insult somebody, and the vitriol is really vicious. Both both there, as I described, but also, John, to your point, in the media now, these echo chambers. They are really vicious, calling people Nazis and "f you" and just really. The civil society. I'm not so
Well,
sure.
yeah, I have strong feelings about character assassination too. Like, I think the slander libel stuff is so hard to prosecute, but like character assassination should just not be a part of debate at all. Like, I believe in vigorous debate. I believe in intellectually honest debate, but when we get into character assassination, I mean that truly is just, yeah. So, but we're
yeah,
not.
it's interesting Anthony brought this up. I just recently thought about this. I Somebody said something and there was just no consequences. And it really made me start thinking, is all of our being nice and being empathetic and being understanding, it has made people very brave to be asses, right? And to be mean to people. And to Anthony's point, there used to be consequences, right? Like people, there's the saying, a well-armed society is a polite society. But it used to be that if you said something, you're likely to get punched in the mouth. And now I just don't think most people see that. And it makes them, in a weird way, trying to be more civil and be nicer has made people less civil. It's
Well,
a
we
weird
have a we
paradox.
have an example of that just last week. I won't mention the network or the person, but imagine if, in 1985, John, when we're trying to rise through the ranks of our companies, we turned to our boss and told them, "You're destroying this company. This, you don't have any idea what you're doing. This place is falling apart at the seams, and I can't support what you're doing," and expect not to be fired? I mean, are you kidding me? And so this guy blows up in a meeting, insults his boss, insults everyone in the room, and then he's the poor person who got fired from the job. I mean, are you kidding me? It was such a right decision to fire that person. And the fact that people are sympathetic, oh, you spoke up, you know, no, that is not civil. There are proper ways to handle that, your feelings. There are other ways, very legitimate ways to go about it. And that's just stopped. Now we just insult. We just insult. And I hope, I think it's going to get better, because it can't get worse.
Well,
You have to hit bottom. I mean, these kids have been just beat on. And again, let's talk about abundance. This is why they're getting the $26 lunch instead of putting it in the ETF. They want to live for today. They don't see a brighter future. This is as good as it's going to get. So I get paid. I'm going to go out. I'm going to have a good time with my friends. And, as my old boss, Tom Strachan, used to say, we'll worry about tomorrow.
well, there is.
And you know what? We as boomers, we gave up a lot of fun and games and joy to, get to where we are. And we're happy where we are today. If I could do it over again, I wonder.
It's delayed gratification, right? That's full circle back to Randy's opening. And I think like anything else, delayed gratification can probably be taken too far, like everything, right? And so what's the right balance? And so again, I think about, like, when we talk to people about this, what's the right level of delayed gratification?
And it's probably not the same for everybody, right? Because if you're the billionaire that never has any fun and never does anything, and we've talked about this on numerous episodes, right? This is one of our struggles in abundance, is how do you find that? Is that person have a better life than the person that dies broke, but they took one hell of a ride and they took vacations and did things and didn't work as hard, right? I mean, that's for each person to decide. But John, one of the things you do a great job on is talk about what can I control. Okay. So let's talk about that, because I think there are people that are in this, but what can people control, whether they're 18, 22, just getting out of college, or they're 70 years old? What do we have control over?
Yeah, I mean, when I first time I heard this, when someone said there's only two things you can control in your life, and I was a control guy, I was like, well, I can't wait to hear this. I control lots of things. And he said, you get to control your thoughts and your actions, and everything else is not your control. You could influence people. You could try to influence people, but the only thing you control are your thoughts and your actions. And when I thought about that, it was like, that is so painfully honest to me as a guy who wants to control more than that. But when I really embraced that, it took me some time to really embrace that, months of working through that internally. It really gave me a lot more peace in my life and helped me let go of struggling against some things that I was never going to win.
Let's dig there. Control your thoughts. Tell people what's not controlling your thoughts, what you can't control, because I think give people an example of this.
I mean, if I'm highly reactive in my thinking, or if I think I can control your thoughts, or I can control you or control your perception of me, like, those are all things that I can attempt to influence, but I can't control what you do. I can't control what you think. I can't even control my own emotions. Like, emotional reactions or reactions to things, but I can control my thoughts around those things. I can control my actions around those things, right? And
Well, yeah, I mean, I think of it as, if something happens, right? If there's a problem, you can complain about the problem, which you can't control, or you can think, oh, how do I turn this problem into an opportunity?
yeah, I can complain about what somebody else is or isn't doing, what they are or not saying, what they are or not feeling. But at the end of the day, that doesn't necessarily fix a problem, right? And so the question for me is, what can I do? And then what do I have to think about to be able to do it, right? And then I recognize that some things are out of my control. And so I had to practice like radical acceptance around that. And so, Stephen Covey in his book that I read, gosh, 30 years ago now or whatever, talked about a circle of influence versus a circle of concern. And in the circle of influence are the things you can control, and those are your thoughts and your actions. Outside of that are things that concern you. And the book talked about like shrinking your circle of concern so you weren't negatively influenced by things you were concerned about but couldn't do anything about, and expanding the circle of things you could do things about by acting and thinking about things more clearly. And I just thought that was really, when I really put those two concepts together, I felt liberated.
Yeah, what resonates with me when you talk about your thoughts and your actions, if you're thoughtful and you're willing to take action, you're not a victim anymore. What I think I see out there is this victimhood, or this counterculture of everyone's a victim. And not to bore you guys with history, but in the 60s, the US government, took on a mission that was so foolhardy that it became readily apparent that it was going to be an abject failure. And yet they continued to pour billions of dollars into the Vietnam initiative, the Vietnam War. It was poorly planned. It was a mission to nowhere, but campuses rose up against it. And it was a tremendous movement of saying, this is not acceptable. And as a result of it, we're going to protest, we're going to boycott, we're going to unfortunately take over some buildings, but we're going to be heard about this. And eventually it became politically beneficial to side with the protesters. It was nothing else. Okay, we got enough money. We're going to keep sending money to these guys because we're going to want to build up our military industrial complex. But you know what? It politically makes a lot of sense to listen to these kids. That's what's happening now. It's politically beneficial. Next, they're gonna listen to these guys, listen to these kids, and they're gonna be politically motivated to serve those needs. Now, it happens to be not necessarily, in my opinion, the best way about doing things, through socialism and handouts, but that's what's going to happen. That's how we're going to solve the problem of income inequality and the unfairness and so on and so forth. We're gonna buy our way out of it, which is going to make us broke, and my Bitcoins are going to go to $10 million and so on. So
from your mouth to God's ears. But this is, John, this takes me back to just sales stuff, right? We've both spent years training salespeople. And, one of the things you always talk about in marketing and sales is that you lean into the pain points. Pain sells much better than benefits to the average, not everybody, but the average person. The pain is more effective. Well, I don't know if anybody does this better than politicians, and I don't even know how conscious it is, but
The
and
media.
yeah,
The media is even better.
right. If it bleeds, it leads, right? And you never hear the positive stories. And this is a challenge for people, including me, right? Like, I have spent thousands and thousands of hours digging into the problem with fiat currencies and why we went off gold, and looking at this, and I can get into, oh God, but the solution is buy things that they can't print, buy things that are scarce. I think it's Bitcoin is number one, but I'm really happy if people buy anything that the government can't print and they can't control and they can't inflate it, creating all these problems. But it's a challenge, right? Because if you're trying to explain this to somebody and it's a complex topic, it's very, very hard for 99% of the people to get this if they don't really understand the problem. The problem is, in getting them there, it's really hard to get enough time and enough attention to explain the problem. You lose most people before they understand it, and and therefore they're never really ready for the solution because they don't see the problem.
What I would say about that, though, is I work in healthcare, and healthcare, I think most people would have a point of view that part of healthcare, at the very least, is broken. And so my viewpoint with our patients is really clear. Hey, we can argue about how broken it is, or we can talk about what's available to you with your set of circumstances inside of the system, wherever you happen to be in the system. And let's just help you navigate the next one step. whatever that next win is, the easy win, like get your next easy win, right? And so I think sometimes and I overcomplicate the problem, right? I talk about the system and I want to understand it holistically. But the reality is that for some people, that's not the most important thing. The most important thing is like, what's next? Like and that's where I find a lot of hope, by the way. I think there's a tremendous amount of hope in like what's next because most people can control something. Maybe not, they can't control everything, but they can control something that they can do and not be a victim.
Yeah.
So much of the narrative is driven by the coast, the dense populations on either coast and the noise that comes out of there and the difficulties of living there expense wise and so on. I wonder if we're seeing the forest for the trees. Maybe it's not as bad as we think it is. The three of us have been in our own personal echo chambers, and we're hearing a lot about, oh, the kids are upset and so on and so forth. But on a scale of 1 to 10, a college grad coming out of a university in the center of Massachusetts or on the coast of Boston versus a kid coming out of college with a similar degree and similar skills in Kansas City, Missouri, where are they on that, anxiousness scale or that victimhood scale? I wonder. I don't have an answer to that. It just, it's always been, the flyover states have always been kind of just put to the side from a narrative perspective. But so that's one of the reasons why I have hope, because there's more of the flyover states than there are of the coastal states. And those
But I
coastal
think
states
the problem
moving.
is real, Anthony. Like I think
No, I'm
the
not saying
problem
it's
is
not real.
real.
Don't get me wrong. The problem is real, and yeah, in small town America, there've been suicides by young girls and overdoses and so on. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I'm just saying on a scale. If you're living in New York City, to afford to live in New York City or to afford to live in the west of the 405 in California, which is near the ocean, that's an impossibility for all but a very few college grads, to live the lifestyle that they're seeing on TikTok. Okay. That, you're talking about sharing apartments, sharing bathrooms, having a whole different lifestyle versus, living in a 1,400 square foot, 3-bedroom, 2-bath in somewhere in the Midwest, not in a major city. It's a very, very different lifestyle. And I can understand. Now there's more people live in those places. That's why there's more fear, right? It's just sheer numbers. But that's why I am hopeful that we've hit bottom and people are going to realize there is a better life out there. You just have to take, what is it? The method to complete a marathon is one step at a time. One step forward, and just keep going and make sure you have goals. And I think circling all the way back to the earlier discussion about living for today, what are your goals? Whether you're a boomer or an Xer or a Gen Z, what do you want? What is it that you actually want? Be clear about it. You can change it, but have something that you want that you're working towards.
What can you trust? So if you're talking to a kid right now and they're getting out, like, we talked about housing prices are going up, and I've talked about it nauseum. You can't trust the money because they're printing more of it. And they were told to get good grades and all that different stuff. So let's flip that. What can they trust? If you're
I
talking,
think, Ray, I think what they can trust is they're going to continue to print money like that. I think when someone shows you who they are, you should believe them, right? I think you should believe that the media and marketers have an agenda and understand. You talk about it all the time. Follow the money. That'll tell you what the agenda looks like. Follow the power, right? And so you can trust that is influencing the rules. You can trust that you know if you own a business or if you learn how to make money in this economy, you're probably going to be okay going forward. And so you can trust that technology is changing quickly and will continue to change quickly, and that if you have a hope about it not doing that, that's probably not well biased. So I think there are some things you can trust, and you can trust that change is inevitable. And that's been true for all of human history. right? I also think you can trust that things are never as good as people say they are, and they're never as bad as they say they are. Like that's been my experience pretty consistently for decades. And then I think that, this is something you and I have arm wrestled about. Like for me, I think you can trust science, but not in the way that science is like the thing. Science is a collection of strongly held beliefs that are hopefully loosely held so you can get new data and improve those beliefs over time. I think you can trust we're going to keep learning as a society and moving forward. And I think you can trust that there will continue to be haves and have-nots, which sucks. But that people, at least in the US, have a lot of autonomy about the outcomes in their life if they choose to control that.
Let me ask a
Take
better.
it a different way. I would say that the only thing you can trust, you can trust everything John mentioned, of course, but the only thing you can truly trust is yourself, what you want to be, where you want to go. There's a line in a Grateful Dead song that says, I can tell your future, just look what's in your hand. And so what's in your hand are your capabilities, your desires, your mission in life. You control that. No one can take that away from you. They can try, they can try to influence you, but they can't. Back to John's very simple statement, they cannot control your thoughts and your actions. So that's what you should trust. And where that takes you, and I don't like the term have-nots. I prefer the term have less, because this society is not leaving people on the street that don't want to be on the street. If you want help and you need help, this society will get it for you. If you're truly in need, there's unemployment compensation, disability. There's enough out there. There's communities, church communities and so forth that will help people at least get on their feet. So now that's not true in every country, in every city. It's not equal in every city either. But if you trust yourself, you can't take a step forward. You can't, guaranteed.
I realize I didn't ask the best question. I was looking a little more for practical steps, but I was thinking about it a lot like Anthony, right? You trust yourself, but some of that is working on yourself, investing in yourself. And I would hope that community falls into that you can trust your community, your friends, your family, your spouse, or, I hope that people are, one of the things they're working on is building that community, but learning skills. And we talk a lot here about AI. Like, I think if people spend an hour a day learning AI right now, they put themselves at the top. Even if it's harder, they're giving themselves tremendous benefit and a tremendous advantage. But it could be the other end. Go learn a trade. There's
I
a
think
ton of electricians and plumbers and all that right now, right?
I think it takes 15 minutes a day, Randy. I think an hour a day would be awesome, but it takes 15 minutes a day. And so I think learning from other people is a hugely important skill that is underestimated for sure.
And yeah, I just think that invest in yourself, invest in your future, figure out what you want. I mean, some of this is the same self-help stuff that's been true forever, right? I mean, we could go back for thousands of years to today, and your thoughts, your actions, whatever, being better mentally, psychologically, physically, health-wise, do whatever you can to compete in this world, because AOC and Bernie Sanders and hell, it's people on the right and the left, they're not going to stop telling you that it's somebody else's fault, right? The pain sells. And, one of the things to build yourself is stop listening to those idiots, whether they're Republicans or Democrats. They don't have your best interest in mind. They have their best interest in mind. And figure it out. There's opportunity out there, from AI to, swinging a hammer and everything in between if you go look for it. So
There's a lesson in the book, The Art of War by Sun Tzu, where he says, you must know your position. If you're in a valley and your enemy is on a hill, you must be defensive and prepare for an attack. If you're on a hill and your enemy's in a valley, you must attack. So you have to understand where you are in the equation at any given moment. And after 70 years on this earth, I've been in both places multiple times. I've been on the defensive. I've been on the offensive. Right now, I'm on a nice flat road. So it's, it's pretty good, but you got to know where you are and what you're capable of, and then get some thoughts about it, and then take an action, take the appropriate action. But I always go back to it. I always try to think of where I am. It doesn't work all the time. And sometimes I forget. Sometimes I think I'm on a hill, but I'm actually in a valley. But it's a way to approach. I think it's a way to approach life in anything, whether it's friends, family, fitness, finance, fun. Know where you are, and then that next step is something you can trust because you're self-aware, which is really, really important. And it's not. It doesn't matter what generation you're from. We all make the mistake of not being self-aware sometimes.
All right. I think that's a great place to end, or at least go to break. If you're still listening, you love us. So subscribe, YouTube, Apple, Spotify, wherever you're listening, hit whatever it has, a thumbs up, a like button, give us a review, all that good stuff. And you can find us at talesofabundance.com. And gentlemen, we will be right back after the break with the abundance briefing.
Here at Tales of Abundance, we know that fitness is just as important as money or milestones. It's one of our key 5Fs for lots of us. Taking care of my body while I build my life is one of the more time-consuming and difficult goals to chase. That's why we're partnering with AG1. It's a daily drinkable habit. Less than a minute, that's formulated with 75 plus vitamins and nutrients and designed to support energy, digestion, and immune defense. It even has a few grams of protein that we're all chasing these days. And if you want to try it with our affiliate link, you'll also receive a free AG1 flavor sampler, plus vitamin D3 plus K2 with your welcome kit when you first subscribe, a $72 value. Go to shop.drinkag1.com/tales.
Welcome back. All right, Dr. John, let's jump into the abundance briefing. You're going to be Dr. Ozempic. You know a lot with your practice at Proctina Health. So a new study shows that Ozempic slows biological aging by 9%. So talk us through this.
Yeah, I mean, biological aging is really interesting. We don't do biological aging in our practice. I do look at it in my particular set of labs because it's very interesting to me and I want to understand it. The reality is Ozempic's doing some really cool stuff in the body. It is, for the most part, helping people feel satisfied from a hunger perspective. And so that's leading to people consuming less food, utilizing energy more effectively in their body. Hopefully the resistance training so they don't lose muscle. But not just this cool stuff you're seeing about aging. There was 40 papers, posters, and presentations at a recent oncology event just in the last week or two, where it seems like maybe this Ozempic or GLP-1 drugs are also having an impact on cancer that's slowing cancer growth and slowing the development of cancer, even precancerous. So I haven't read all those 40 papers and I didn't watch all the videos, and we don't work in oncology specifically, but it seems like there's a growing body of evidence that metabolically it's really, really good for you. Not that surprising when you understand how GLP-1s work in the body.
So does that mean we can all go to a microdose of this, or how does the rank and file, how do they absorb this? If they don't really need to lose weight and they don't have type 2 diabetes.
Yeah. We haven't done the studies yet on whether or not, like, we're looking at all these things amongst the general population in the studies that I'm seeing. It would be reasonable to have a hypothesis that someone who doesn't need a GLP-1 is already in that category where it's not the drug itself that's necessarily changing these things. It's the lifestyle itself that is actually having that lower risk profile, would be my initial hypothesis, but we just don't have the science there.
The GLP-1s have been around for a long, long time, right?
Decades.
Yeah. So why was it never, quote unquote, discovered that it was this great weight loss thing? We went through a period of obesity where the obesity rates in this country skyrocketed over the last 30 or 40 years. How come we missed it?
The side effects were so difficult to deal with that adherence to using them was just nearly impossible, I think, was the overwhelming thought process.
What changed? The people aren't having
New molecules, new molecules, new delivery of the GLP-1 that doesn't have the same side effects.
So it is your new GLP-1 isn't your old GLP-1.
Right. Yeah. No, none of the terrible side effects from before. Yeah.
All right.
How do they do that?
Oh, go ahead.
I think they're changing the molecule and the delivery mechanism. And so you have these, first generation GLP-1s handled things one way, and these second GLP-1s handle it a different way. And there's some new GLP-1s we're expecting to come on the scene in the next year or so that should improve even further, is kind of the early evidence. And so
So GLP-1 is like an umbrella, and it's and underneath that are various approaches to making a GLP-1.
various synthetics. Yeah. So glucagon-like peptides on a specific pathway. Yeah.
So let me play the conspiracy theorist here. How much of this is economic because patents were up and Eli Lilly or whoever has a new patent that they can control and sell and make more money? And by the way, I'm not opposed to them making money. I think that's good that they're incentivized, and I believe in the free market. But how much of it is just the incentives changed because they can control it longer or sell it?
Yeah, I mean, 100%. They want to update their patents, and they want to update the patents on the drug and update the patents on the delivery mechanism for sure. That's a thing. But at some point, we're going to see that a generic tirzepatide, which is, today, Manjaro as an example, is going to be available and effective enough. But there are going to be people that want the newest thing because it's better for whatever reason the new molecule is developed.
All right, let's go to salt beats lithium, and this is pretty interesting. The world's largest battery maker, CATL, has confirmed sodium ion mass production for 2026. And they're so the largest sodium order ever, 60 gigawatts over 3 years, and first delivery systems in September, right? And this is instead of lithium, right, which we are talking about rare earths, and we don't have these, and China controls them and everything else. And how are we going to get all these going? They use sodium and basically seawater, right? Like instead of having to find lithium, the world has abundant seawater. I think this is pretty big. Like this could improve energy, change energy.
So I've not read deeply into this one yet, Randy, but I am so excited on the face of it. We talked a few weeks ago about salt that came from desalinization, and they're just stacking up the salt, and it can do like all this environmental harm. If we have a you know an output of desalinization that can be used then for energy, like wow.
Yeah. I mean, batteries become cheaper, right? I have solar panels on my roof, and I produce roughly the energy that I consume, but part of it gets sold back to the grid, and I still have to then in turn, I have to buy from the grid because it ends up being, I can't store it effectively. I have one battery and I really need 3 or 4 is what I actually need. So, and part of it is just batteries are expensive. So making batteries cheaper and, it's got to be better for the environment. And I hadn't even thought about your angle of the salt that, we start
Yeah,
doing
that was the first thing I
desalination.
thought about. But I need to dig into this and understand, is it a teaspoon of salt for a battery, or is it, a truckload? How much salt is would be consumed if every battery maker moved to this type of manufacturing?
Maybe it doesn't matter though, Anthony. I mean, I think about like there was some picture that we saw of like a salt heap that was, I can't remember how tall it was, 700 feet tall and the size of multiple football stadium. Like, I just think we've got so much of it available right now. Yeah, I
Yeah,
don't.
I hope it takes a lot of salt, and I hope they can use it, and then we can stop this shutting down of desalinization plants because of the effect it has in the surrounding area where they pump the heavily salted wastewater back into the ocean.
My fear is it's coming out of China, and I have a real fear about science coming out of China right now. And is it science or is it what's the other word for it when you?
Propaganda.
Yeah, there you go.
Propaganda.
Yeah, there's a little problem there. So
Well, we've never shied away from talking about things we don't understand, so
there we go.
this falls into that category.
Let's keep it that way. All right. Our next topic, the XPrize, with the use of Google, is putting up the money. They're paying $2 million to prove anyone can build a real business in 90 days. And this goes with our topic earlier, I think. I mean, this is one of the things for people to lean into, is if you really want to build something, you got to learn the skills, but it's never been easier. So $2 million to build a business. They already have over 11,000 participants registered in the first few weeks. And there's 5 categories: education, entrepreneurship, small business, financial access, and professional services. And the top 5 get to pitch at a live moonshot summit in LA, which is Peter Diamandis's thing. 500 grand to first, and then the other 1.5 million going to, other place finishers. So what say you?
I think we should revisit, Diamandis in this group and what they're all about. I mean, this group of men and women and leaders in various industries are really working hard to change the world, to in your words, to democratize technology and really level the playing field so that real change comes in our world in terms of medical advances, space, energy, and so forth. And they're working really, really hard, and they're putting up their own money and raising money to give people opportunity to change the world. And I think these are great people, and they should be lauded for what they're doing. They're already as rich as they want to be. It's not about them making money. It's about them helping to change the world for the good. And this is truly an abundance effort, an abundance enterprise. And I just think it gives me hope that there are people like this out there that are doing such things. So I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, I love the whole XPrize thing, and I always go back to, a lot of the things that have been accomplished over the years have been because of XPrizes. And I think this is what, if our government really wanted to be productive, instead of trying to give everybody everything, if they would create the right incentives, right? Say, hey, here's the problem we want to solve. And for a fraction of how government would solve the problem, or in most cases, government makes the problem worse when they throw money at it, right? Seems like the more money we spend on homelessness, the more homeless we have because people are incentivized. If they would say, hey, instead of we're going to, whatever, we spent 10 billion on homelessness last year, whatever, I'm just making the number up. Here's $1 billion to solve this problem, and they let entrepreneurs do it. My guess is homelessness would go away fairly quickly, or at least if it doesn't go away, we would make a big, big dent, and we have Alan here in town with an unbelievable project, but I think people would come up with solutions right and left.
Yeah, some of that is happening though, Randy. Like to be fair, I think some of that is happening, right? So you have SBIR grants, STTR grants. Like there are things the government's doing to help that. ARPA H is one that we're trying to get more involved with. So I am hopeful the government's trying to do some of that. But to your point, I think they could do more of it. And if they were better publicized so everyone knew about it, the problems would likely get solved better.
Yeah. I mean, the amount of money, okay, I just Googled, California has allocated 24 billion specifically toward homelessness. 24 billion just in California alone, right? And it keeps getting worse. So, clearly the government solution never seems to work. I just wish they would take 10% of that, take 2.4 billion and say, here's incentive, solve homelessness in our state. And I bet we'd have solutions that dwarf what they've come up with, because change the incentives, change the outcome, right? But I agree with Anthony. I think the XPrize is amazing.
Well, look at again. We beat a horse here with Elon. Look at what he's done in space compared to what the government has done in space. I mean, yes, the government got us, to the moon and back, blew up a couple of Challenger space shuttles, and then basically shut down. And this guy comes along. I don't know, what's it been, 10 years? He's about to launch an IPO around it, the largest IPO in history. So it's an example of just one guy, but private enterprise, private entrepreneurs, they have a better track record than the government at a lot of things. Not everything. I wouldn't want private enterprise to run our military and all that, but although to some extent they do now with what they're building for the military. So,
All right, gentlemen, I think that's a wrap. Everybody listening, go spread a little abundance this week, and we will talk to you again in about 7 days.
tell your
See you next
friends.
time. Thanks, guys.
All right.
Listen and subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Click follow for more content like this, or go to talesofabundance.com to join our community and get free tools.